This interview is sponsored by Grantstone Shoes. Grantstone Shoes is a third-generation family of shoemakers that uses high-quality leather to make very high-quality men's dress shoes and boots at affordable prices. Mo and I each have a pair of these shoes. We think they're good. We've been wearing them for over a month now, trying them out. If you don't believe us, go check out the customer reviews for Grantstone Shoes. They have a lot of 5-star customer reviews. They also have excellent reviews from independent fashion bloggers. And if you like the shoes, enter promo code GOLD, that's GOLD, on the grantstoneshoes.com website for 10% off your order. That's grantstoneshoes.com, enter promo code GOLD for a 10% off discount. Hi everyone, it's Jason Barrick of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He is Managing Director at Global Wealth Protection. He's traveled to over 70 countries. He's an American expat, and his business, he likes to help clients internationalize their business, their wealth, and their life. Sounds good to me. So we're going to learn more about his business, and also, in these challenging times that we have, especially after the election. Bobby Casey, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me today.
Now, Bobby, you are an American expat, and I've seen some of your posts on Facebook with some of the funny pictures you've posted about Hillary Clinton being Joker and Two-Face. So what's your opinion then of what's gone on in the election, specifically then with the mainstream media? As an American expat, are you just in shock about how many Americans have been, brainwashed with some of this propaganda coming from the mainstream media?
I find it shocking that how many people believe mainstream media on either side. Actually, I'm not pro Trump or pro Clinton either way. I'm pro individualism. Let's call it that. I think people need to take responsibility for their own actions and subsequently take responsibility for their own mistakes. I don't think anybody needs to be relying on the next election or the next senator or the next member of the House to be their savior on, how, the quality of their life. I think it's crazy anybody would look at a politician and think, oh my God, my quality of life has dramatically changed. Like all these riots, this is insane. Who riots over this stuff? I mean, it's crazy. It's your life. Why are you rioting over an election? It's insane. That blows my mind.
Aren't some of the rioters, Bobby, a lot of them are probably getting paid by George Soros at least $1,500 to do riots, to make things look bad on the TV cameras?
I saw something like that. I saw a few people on Facebook. You mentioned my Facebook account, which, by the way, Jason, on Facebook, I consider myself a professional antagonist. So as I'm sure you know from seeing some of my posts, but I did see some stuff on Facebook. People were posting Craigslist ads offering $1,500 to join in protest. And it's fun. I'm originally from North Carolina, and I live in Eastern Europe right now. But I was last week. I was in North Carolina, and in my town, the night before I left, in my town, right in front of the condo I was staying in, there was protests and riots on the street in a small town in North Carolina. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you got to be joking me. This is insane. I don't know where this is coming from. I mean, like I said, I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm pro individualism. But I do know, or at least I don't recall any riots happening after the either of Obama's elections. I don't recall any Republicans going out on the streets, burning stuff and blocking highways when Obama won twice. So I don't know. It's crazy to me. These riots are insane.
There was actually a lot of white people who voted for Obama. So, I mean, they saw in the 8 years Obama was in office, politicians don't do what they said. Obama promised hope and change, and we got very little hope and almost no change. The status quo basically stayed the same. I wrote an article about this for the News Doctors exclusive a couple days ago. I don't know if you saw it, but basically like the real reasons why Hillary Clinton lost the election, and it's because, she aligned herself with Obama. She wasn't a change candidate. She was basically a 4 more years of Obama candidate. And a lot of people who voted, who were swing voters and voted for Obama the last 2 terms, they were pissed off because Obama didn't do what he promised. And so, a lot of those people swung over to Trump.
Well, they were also getting sick of 30-40% increases in their healthcare premiums every year too. I tell you what, I'm pretty happy to be an expat where I am exempt from the Affordable Care Act. Jason, you know how much I paid for my health insurance last year? I just renewed it a couple weeks ago.
$100 a month?
If only, right? I have a high deductible healthcare plan in Europe. It covers me anywhere in the European Union. I have to pay out of pocket for anything up to my 12,000 euro limit. So it's a high deductible plan. I don't ever go to the doctor. I don't care about, co-pays and all this other stuff. I just want to make sure something's covered in case, I break my back or get a brain tumor or something. I pay 38 euros a year.
Wow, that sounds good.
It's like $42 a year. $42 a year. I added it up. I figured as a single male, I would spend at least between premiums and, maybe a checkup or a dentist visit or something like that a couple of times a year. I figured I'd probably pay around 10 grand a year if I still lived in the States for healthcare.
Yeah, the costs are just getting ridiculous. And, they blame it on capitalism and free markets, but we haven't had free markets in a lot of the healthcare industry for a very long time. My dad is a retired doctor, and he was basically saying how the patient was getting screwed, the doctor was getting screwed, and the government was just intervening more and more, and the insurance companies and the middlemen were the ones who were making the money using the government to help them do so. And, now if you're an American, you go to a doctor's office, there's actually a lot more people in the office filing paperwork than there are doctors and nurses.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere there's something like 4 administrators to every doctor now. I don't know if that's true or not, so,
it is.
Feel free to fact check me, but it's something like that, I think.
It is. It's probably even more than that at this point. And if Obamacare had continued to progress and, eventually, I think Obamacare was passed so it would fail intentionally so they could, move it closer to universal health care and socialized medicine. But, the system is just really bad. You have to fill out a form for the doctor, and the doctor gives you only a minute or two maybe to write some. The doctor doesn't even spend that much time with you. It's mostly about, writing you more prescriptions because so many people are on prescription drugs now that, instead of actually figuring out how to eat healthy or preventative medicine, they just give you prescription drugs for stuff that could potentially make your health even worse.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple days ago. I was in New York a few days ago. Yeah, had a conversation with him, and we were discussing the votes on marijuana legalization in the states, medicinal or recreational use. And he said it, in his view, he thought it was a good thing that, marijuana was getting legalized. And then we discussed a little bit about Portugal, where Portugal, drugs are not legal there, but they're decriminalized. So the difference between decriminalization and legalization is decriminalization basically means you can have marijuana or cocaine or whatever you want. You can have it, but there can't be a corner drug market that sells marijuana and cocaine. You can't legally sell it, but you can have it, if you make it at home, you produce it yourself, you grow it yourself, whatever. And his view was that he thinks it should be legal. And I said, well, actually, I kind of like the Portuguese example where it's decriminalized, because when it's legal, then the government is involved in basically all the production layers and taxation of the drugs. Whereas if it's decriminalized, it's completely an individual thing. People do what they want, and they're not going to prison for having an ounce of marijuana. And we had a back and forth discussion, and he said he'd like to see it more legalized because it's, more, we'll use cocaine, for example. You don't really know what you're getting, right? And I said, well, look at it like this. The FDA regulates the drug market in the U.S., and somehow Adderall is a completely legal drug when chemically it's almost identical to methamphetamine. And the FDA legalized that. So do we really need the FDA? I mean, are they really the greatest oversight? Where you could use the what is it, the EPA in Flint, Michigan. How great did they do with the municipal water supply in Flint, Michigan? I mean, how great do these government agencies really actually do? You know what I mean?
Yep, that's a good point about the FDA. I mean, the FDA is so biased. If a big pharmaceutical company needs a drug passed, even if they know it's harmful or kills people, they'll just argue, oh, it only kills one person in 1,000. And
well, they passed Adderall.
Yeah,
they passed Adderall. Adderall is almost chemically identical to methamphetamines, and nobody in their right mind would say, "Oh yeah, methamphetamine's great. Let me give that to my 8-year-old hyperactive kid. That seems like a great idea." No, but let me go down to my psychiatrist and get a prescription of Adderall for my kid, which is almost identical drug.
I think another reason, Bobby, that the marijuana is being passed by so many states, besides the fact that citizens want it, is the states are basically bankrupt because, they promise so much money in unfunded liabilities to teachers unions and employee pension funds that they need to find some other source of tax revenue. So
they need the cash.
Yeah, they need the cash. And instead of that money, leaving the country or in an underground economy or leaving the country in drug cartels, they figure we may as well get a cut of this by having it grown here in the U.S.
Well, that's a pro-government argument. I'm not pro-government. I say starve the beast personally. But, that goes back to the election discussion, the Trump winning the election. I am of the opinion, I'm sure I'm going to take some heat from this on both sides of the argument, the pro-Clinton and the pro-Trump. Listeners in your audience, by all means, I enjoy being a professional antagonist. So by all means, hit me up on Facebook and we'll argue it. That's fine with me. But my opinion on the election is this is the greatest election in my lifetime, maybe in the past 100 years of the U.S. And the reason being, not because I'm pro-Trump at all. I think he's a freaking lunatic. I think he's an absolute lunatic. I watched the debates, and I haven't watched debates in over a decade. I could care less about politics. I watch these debates out of, let's say, entertainment value because it's funny. It's hysterical. And Trump can't carry himself. He's a buffoon in some ways. He is completely I don't know. Some of his ideas are completely wacky. I don't think he's very good at all. Let's put it that way. He's a lunatic. But that's not why I think the election was great. I think, number one, and the main thing is the people were fed up with the bullshit. Okay? If you think about it, Trump beat 16 other Republican nominees to get the Republican nomination. All 16 of them were career, lifelong politicians who were deeply embedded in politics. And he beat 16 of those guys. He blew up the Republican Party. The entire Republican Party said, okay, enough of this bullshit. We don't want any of you career politician jokers representing us anymore. Even the Republicans are saying, well, yeah, I guess Trump's kind of a lunatic, but, he's better than all you other jokers, right? He blew up the Republican Party. He blew up the mainstream media. If you watched through the election, which I'm sure you did, even CNN and all the other mainstream outlets were reporting an 80+% chance of Hillary Clinton winning on Monday night, right? And it was crazy. 80+% chance. And I can't say, what did he win by? It was 300 and what was it? Electoral 306?
I think the final number is a little bit below 300. I think they gave him 290, but they're saying Hillary barely eked out the popular vote. But there's actually, from my sources, from what I've heard from people who spoke in the Trump camp, they're convinced that Hillary Clinton used voter fraud and stole 5 states. So it shouldn't have even been that close. Trump, basically, without this vote rigging, voter fraud, voter manipulation, Trump would have had an overwhelming victory in both the popular vote and in the Electoral College. He would have had well over 300 electoral votes.
I'll give you something else. And let me finish my rant here for a second. I'll give you else something to think about from my perspective in the popular vote. I thought it was over 300 electoral votes. But anyway, 290. It's still a sizable victory. It's not like he won with 271 electoral votes, right? mean, it's still a pretty sizable victory. So he blew the mainstream media out of the water. People are now opening their eyes looking, hey, wait a second. Maybe mainstream media is actually full of shit, right? I mean, maybe some people are opening their eyes. Like, in my opinion, I consider this election to be an awakening of some sort, right? And then lastly, he beat what may be the most criminally corrupt politician ever in the past 100 years, or maybe the history of the U.S. in general. He beat Hillary Clinton. I can't believe. Okay, I can understand people voting Democrat because Trump is a clown. I get that. He is a clown. But I can't believe people vote for Hillary because they actually believe she's a good choice. That blows me away. That completely blows me away. I mean, how can you possibly overlook the enormous amount of evidence and speculations and everything about all of her corruption, her pay-to-play, the deleted emails, all the suspicious deaths surrounding her career, all these things. I mean, all the women in Bill Clinton's life, Bill Clinton's close connection to Epstein, the guy down in Virgin Islands, right, with his sex island. I mean, all these crazy things, and I still can't believe a Democrat would say, well, yeah, I still think she's a good option. I mean, come on, guys. But anyway,
there was a lot of Democrats like that, man, unfortunately. And,
it blows me away.
These people were book smart, too. I had to block some of them on Twitter. One of them was telling me a week before the election that Trump was a Russian spy and that anyone other than Trump was a great candidate. And I was basically telling him the only concrete proof we have that anyone sold out the American people to Russia is the Uranium One deal that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and Bill Clinton put together with the Clinton Foundation, which is, just so many crimes right there.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're
denying it. Bill gave a speech in Moscow. What was it, $500,000 speech to Sberbank, the state-owned Russian bank, and then magically somehow that deal gets pushed through, and then magically you got about a dozen donors, $1 million plus donors to the Clinton Foundation, all that magically happened to be involved in that deal. Right.
Well,
But that doesn't really happen, right? Because she hasn't been convicted of anything, right?
Well, she's Teflon coated, man. There was overwhelming. You've mentioned some of the scandals. I mean, there's over 30 years of scandals for Hillary Clinton, and yet, she has never been charged or convicted in any of these things. Bill even weaseled out. He lost his law license with the Monica Lewinsky scandal, but, he didn't go to prison. So, but they did spend a lot of money on legal fees doing that, and they were basically broke, and then they built up the Clinton Foundation and turned that into basically a criminal mob operation.
Well, Jason, I used to have a Cobra and the car, and it had about 600 horsepower, and I got up to about 170 miles an hour on that car one time on a highway, and I didn't even go to jail. Therefore, I must not have done it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, by the same logic, I must not have gone 170 because I didn't go to jail for it.
Yeah, well, I've heard from other sources that, the worst shoes are yet to drop. Hopefully, Trump, now that his administration is taking over, he will put in people in the Department of Justice, attorney generals, and in the FBI who will, indict her, charge her, and actually prosecute her instead of, these corrupt people at the top of the FBI and the DOJ like Loretta Lynch and James Comey and Eric Holder before then who are blocking it. I've heard, the evidence that they found on Anthony Weiner's computer linking the Clinton Foundation and Uma Abedin and Hillary Clinton. There's videos of pedophilia and other stuff with the Podesta brothers involved. Even Bill Clinton, I've heard there's a sex tape with young kids involved with pedophile stuff, and it was blocked before the election. So, I mean, the stuff that the Clintons have gotten away with is just unbelievable.
It doesn't surprise me. But anyway, my point is, listen, I still think this is the greatest election in my lifetime and probably the past 100 years, only because it is an awakening of the American people who said, you know what? Enough of this bullshit. We're tired of it. We don't care if we're electing a lunatic. Even the people that think he's a lunatic still elected him anyway or still voted for him anyway because they're sick. In my opinion, I don't think anybody, some people did. Overall, I don't think people generally voted for Trump. They voted against a broken bullshit system. ultimately, is I think what happened. Now, I'll give you one point. You talked about the popular vote. This is an interesting thing that I really just started thinking about the past couple of days. There are about 8.5 million Americans that live abroad. So they would be absentee ballots, right? So if you do the math on that, so this year you had about 50% of the voting population, or 60% of the eligible voters voted, right? 50% roughly. Out of 8.5 million, you probably have about 75% of those that are of age to vote. They're adult and old enough to vote. So 75% of 8.5 million is what? Roughly 6 or a bit more than 6 million people. Of those 6 million, approximately half of them, based on statistics anyway, again, I'm just basing this on statistics, about half of them voted. That's 3 million votes. Well, historically, the expat vote, or the absentee ballot vote, has gone overwhelmingly Republican. At least historically, around 2/3. It's been about 2/3 Republican. So you're looking about, of 3 million potential voters, absentee ballot voters that voted, about 2/3 of them, roughly 2 million of them, probably voted Republican. But here's the interesting thing. They don't count absentee ballots at all unless, there's like a tie. They don't even get counted. I read an article on the day of the election that said Guam has completed its voting and whatever, but it's a Guam completed its voting, but Guam's votes don't count unless there is unless there's a tiebreaker necessary. Which is kind of funny if you think about it. I mean, if you live in Guam, why would you bother even voting if you know it doesn't matter, right? I mean, that's a whole different argument. But I think the absentee ballot issue is kind of interesting, that you're looking at about 2 million people, hypothetically, that probably voted Republican, and all these people saying, well, Hillary won the popular vote. Well, do we really know she won the popular vote, since they're not even counting 3 million votes that are sitting out there in some computer somewhere?
I don't think she won the real popular vote if they were to actually investigate, this voter fraud and voter manipulation. So I don't think she would have actually won it. There was a lot of tricks that were played. From the sources I've had. In Virginia, the Governor Terry McAuliffe, who's been friends with the Clintons for many decades, and he was actually a board member on the Clinton Foundation, in April of this year, he actually got 200,000 felons, allowed them to vote in this election. And almost all of them voted for Hillary Clinton. So that delivered, basically, the state of Virginia was a very close vote. And that helped deliver there were other tricks done too in the state of Virginia, but that also delivered the state, those tricks with what McAuliffe did, delivered the state to Hillary Clinton.
So that's, Virginia went Clinton, right?
Yeah. Virginia is a big swing state. About the northern Virginia part is almost all like government employees, so they're all parasites that are moving here. It's like all, these hardcore Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders people. Bernie Sanders, a lot of people like Bernie Sanders who move here, although I don't know if a lot of them actually voted for him, but they do like a lot of what Bernie Sanders stands for because, he's anti-capitalism, and yet, a lot of the people like Bernie Sanders, love very expensive things. It's kind of like those people who wear, like, Che shirts and, like, have, like, drive very expensive cars, and, yeah, it's kind of like that type of Hollywood level of hypocrisy. But yeah, I mean, you have good points there with the absentee ballots not counted. Those should have been counted. Almost half the country, Bobby, didn't even vote. So if people are this upset with the election, I mean, there was almost 50% of all the adult population in the United States decided to not even vote. So instead of, why are they protesting? Why didn't they just vote at the ballot box instead?
Well, yeah, again, I'm going to be controversial with this, but that's the other thing. Almost 50% didn't vote. That also, to me, is a hugely positive sign for American people, because American people said, you know what? Nobody represents me. You know what? I'm not interested in aligning with either one of these parties because nobody represents me. I'm going to be an individual and take care of myself. To me, a 50%, when it gets to 100%, that's when 100% not voting. That's when I'll be 100% confident in the American people. But I love that 50% didn't vote.
Well, there's a lot of people that vote, though. We've gotten to what Alexis de Tocqueville called, where we have the professional voter, and people want to vote themselves more and more free stuff. Although I guess in this election, there was less people of that. There's people swung back with. I think the Obamacare was premium spiking was one of the main reasons. It was just destroying the standard of living for many middle class and working class people. They can't afford the cost increases. Most people don't barely have a full-time job, or they have a couple part-time jobs, and their bills going up like that. They can't afford something like that. Now, I want to ask you about I want to switch gears and ask you about the current events that are going on right now. You know, we see in India that they're banning the equivalent of $100 bills. Australia recently, one of their major banks, I think Citibank there, is starting to ban cash. You know, we have the U.S. government that's passed this FACTA bill, and it looks like this is combined with more capital controls, war on cash, cashless society. Do you think, you know, this is only going to get worse going forward for American citizens, or is this going to be a global problem?
Both. I mean, it's definitely going to get worse. I guess India just banned their two biggest bills, which really weren't that big if you think about it. I think one of them was roughly the equivalent of like $30, and the other one was roughly 15 or something like that. I can't remember, but they are the two biggest bills. I mean, the European Union just recently banned the 500 euro bill, and they're trying to ban the 100 euro bill right now also. The U.S. has proposed to ban the $100 bill. I think it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Why would you ban the $100 bill? I mean, I get the point. I get the sales pitch anyway. Let's put it that way. The sales pitch is, you know, drug dealers and money launderers, whatever, they deal in cash, and it's harder to deal in 20s than hundreds. I get that point. That's the sales pitch, but that's not the reality of it. That's not really what they're after. They're trying to push everybody into the electronic banking system so that everything's tracked, everything's monitored, and everything's taxed. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Same thing with FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. That is a monster piece of legislation that effectively made every bank in the world the police force for the U.S. Treasury Department and the IRS, ultimately. And I get a lot of people in my business. I get a lot of people talk a lot about FATCA, and they say, "Well, I'll just open a bank account in, you know, whatever, Abu Dhabi or Dubai or in Cayman Islands or in Belize, and then I don't have to worry about FATCA." Well, no, that's not true at all, because ultimately FATCA is, I don't want to get into all the details of FATCA, but ultimately that FATCA bill requires any bank in the world that wants to conduct business in U.S. dollars has to report any U.S. persons that have accounts in those banks. So, for example, we'll use the Abu Dhabi Bank, for example. Let's say you got a bank there in Abu Dhabi that has 100 American persons with accounts. If that bank wants to continue to conduct business in U.S. dollars, meaning they want to send or receive wires in U.S. dollars, they have to be transparent to the U.S. Treasury Department with their U.S. persons that own accounts. If they just say, like what happened in Belize a couple of years ago, Belize, you know, had bank privacy laws, and Belize said, you know, we have bank privacy laws, we don't turn that information over. Well, what happened is Bank of America was the biggest U.S. dollar correspondent bank in Belize. They shut off the U.S. correspondent dollar accounts on all the Belize banks. And what that means is essentially, if you're a bank in another country that doesn't use the U.S. dollar, like that Abu Dhabi Bank or Belize, for example, if you want to send a wire in U.S. dollars, that wire goes through some big bank, primarily in New York. The main ones are Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. I'm missing one.
Citibank.
There's another one. Yeah, Citi. That's the other one I'm missing. Primarily, those guys are the prime U.S. dollar correspondent banks. So if that Abu Dhabi bank wants to send a wire in U.S. dollars, let's say they want to send a wire $100,000 to somebody in Brazil, for example. that money goes through what we use Wells Fargo, for example. That money will go through Wells Fargo as their correspondent bank. If, for example, you've got a Brazilian company that wants to buy, $1 million worth of oil, for example, from, some Dubai company, that $1 million wire goes through that New York bank, city, or whoever.
Yep.
And so if those banks aren't transparent with their American account holders, then the U.S. Treasury Department will go to their correspondent bank, Bank of America, for example, and say, hey, you got to shut this down. You can't conduct business with them anymore. Now, if you're not an American, you think, no big deal. I'm not an American account holder. It won't affect me. Well, it will affect you if you do business around the world and you've got to send wires, and all of a sudden your bank loses its ability to transact business in U.S. dollars. And considering the U.S. dollar is still about 65% of all the daily global transactions, currency transactions, you're going to be in a bind if your bank gets shut out of the U.S. dollar banking system. So, FATCA is a very onerous piece of legislation that literally affects every person in the world who has a bank account.
Yeah, and the thing you brought up with your transfer example is that all the middlemen along the way, the banks are all getting cuts of this. So, not only are they reporting people for their transactions and they're monitoring for the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. government, they're also taking big cuts, fees. So things like the blockchain and Bitcoin, in theory, this should eventually maybe replace some of this business. I think that's why governments are trying to impose big taxes on it while they look for ways to hijack the blockchain technology and move the blockchain technology over to government-backed digital currencies, like you're saying, in their own banking system, so they can track and tax every single transaction. I think, unfortunately, the way things are going, there's going to be like value-added taxes and other taxes and payroll taxes on almost every single transaction when all the money's if you're a U.S. citizen and you pay someone with your digital account, these taxes are all going to be layered on and taken out immediately, and there's going to be no way to do that. I think there's been a very large underground. You're over in Europe. There's a very large underground economy in Europe, isn't it? 40% of all the European economy supposedly underground and cash off the books.
Yeah, it depends on the country, but yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. I mean, I know a lot of people who have their, official jobs, and then they all have side businesses. Some of them have their official job where they get paid officially minimum wage, but then they get paid, they get their envelope check every week as well. They get paid the rest of their paycheck in their envelope. I think the Bitcoin and other digital currencies, honestly, that's you can't unring that bell. That is something that has the potential to be the downfall of government's centralized control. I do think blockchain technology has the ability to do that. Will Bitcoin be the final answer? Probably not. There'll probably be something else that comes out better, smarter, more clever. But ultimately, the decentralized nature of blockchain technology in general, it takes away a lot of the stronghold that governments have over your financial controls. I mean, ultimately, if you and I put enough, we value, we'll use Bitcoin as the example, they're the big one. If you and I put enough value on Bitcoin, the same value that we put on a US dollar or a euro or a pound, why would we ever convert it back into dollars, euros, or pounds? Right? If the perception of value is high enough, then why do we actually ever put it back into dollars, right? If we never put it back into dollars and we only transact business in Bitcoin, we have completely extracted ourselves from the global financial markets. We're in the blockchain completely. And I think that just takes a matter of time. So my point is, you can't unring that bell. People know about it. They're learning about it. There's a lot of fintech out there, financial technology out there that are coming up with new ways to deal with this stuff. And I don't think you can undo it. I think it has the potential anyway to be the downfall of centralized governments and central banking.
Yeah, governments are also looking to hijack that. But yeah, with legal tender laws and taxing people, threatening to tax them if they don't report their Bitcoin transactions. That's how governments can scare people back into the system. But I also know that governments are looking at, especially 90 central banks, are already looking at hijacking the blockchain technology and using it for either private bank blockchains with large Wall Street banks, or governments are doing it on their own government-issued blockchain to track their money supply. And I'm sure they'll put in backdoors there for, the central bankers to create excess money that, the public doesn't know about, or for bribes or other stuff too. So, that's the thing about technology, is sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can be used for, free markets and more individual freedom. And then other times, the government could look for ways to weaponize it.
Well, that's possible. I just, while you were talking, I thought of a guy I met 4 or 5 years ago. I met him at a conference. Young guy in his early mid-20s. This guy had never had a bank account. He started as a teenager doing like web design work for people, and he was an early adopter of Bitcoin, relatively early adopter of Bitcoin. And he just had people pay him in Bitcoin. Kind of a hacker nerd kind of guy. Really interesting, really smart young guy. And I thought it was fascinating. He had never had a bank account. He'd never had a job. Never had to file a tax return because legally he'd never made enough money to ever have to file. He'd never gone over the threshold because every single penny, not really pennies, right? Every single amount of money he'd ever been paid for anything he'd ever done was in Bitcoin. And for his day-to-day transactions, he used exchanges, private exchanges. Like, there are these sites where you can like geolocate people and you say, hey, I need to exchange, 1 Bitcoin for cash. I'll meet you at the local 7-Eleven. Let's make the transaction, right? He would do that for local cash. And then as the technology got better, he ended up getting a Bitcoin debit card so he could, have a credit card or whatever to do transactions. But he kept all of his money in Bitcoin. Last time I talked to him, it's been about a year or so ago, he still never, ever transacted other than when he exchanged money or exchanged Bitcoin for cash. He's never actually got paid in dollars.
That's really cool.
But it's possible to do that. If it's possible to do that as more and more people adopt it. Like you and I, we had placed value on U.S. dollar because of the perception of value. We know that $1 buys us $1 worth of goods and services. $100 buys us $100 worth of goods and services, and there's millions and millions and millions of other people out there that place the equal amount of value. So we have a perception of value of U.S. dollar. I think Bitcoin's the same way. It just takes a little bit of time for that perception of value. Imagine going back in time when paper currency was first initiated. Everybody's used to getting paid in gold or silver coins, and all of a sudden you show up and you say, hey, I'll pay you in these dollars that represent a certain amount of gold sitting in a bank. Would you be skeptical?
Yeah, I would be skeptical, but as long as, I took some of those receipts, which is what the paper money was originally. They were just receipts.
Sure.
They were receipts. And as long as I know I could go to the bank and redeem them, I would test it out and see if I could go and get my gold, and then maybe I would put the gold back after I tested it out. I'm sure a lot of people did that initially.
Yeah, probably so. But, you're in some Wild West town, right? And some guy says, here's $100 worth of gold notes, and it's in a bank 200 miles west of here.
Yeah,
and all you got's a horse.
Then. Yeah, I'd be very skeptical then at that point. Well,
that's what I'm saying.
Have you seen gold money, though? Gold money's kind of bringing that back with basically digital gold stored in the vault, and then you can have your savings stored in physical precious metals, and then when you go to another country, you have a debit card in a local currency, and you could it sells a couple grams of gold and pays in currency, and you're good to go. So
yeah, I've heard gold money has started to make a comeback with that. They had that for many years, and they shut it down from government pressure. I've heard recently, I'll pull it up right now, I've heard recently they have started doing it again, which is interesting to me. I haven't looked it up lately.
Yeah,
I used to have a Gold Money account years ago. It's probably still there. I just haven't logged in and looked at it in ages.
Yeah, the BitGold platform that Gold Money merged with, the BitGold platform's pretty amazing. It took them a lot of time and money and effort, though, to get the regulatory approval to get U.S. citizens. You can send peer-to-peer gold now, grams. So you can pay someone in peer-to-peer gold grams for something, or now they have it for small businesses, so you can set payroll now in a Gold Money account, so you can pay employees now in gold grams, or if you're a corporation, you can pay a dividend out in gold grams, too. So it's pretty cool. I don't know what the exact tax implications are because, unfortunately with the U.S. government, the way they tax anyone holding gold is a pain in the butt. It's done intentionally so people won't hold gold and silver. Do you also help your clients, besides helping them offshore, do you also help them store physical gold and silver outside the U.S.?
We do. Yeah, we have a partner in Switzerland and one in Singapore that we do. Primarily, we do that for trust clients that have trust accounts with us. But yeah, we do that for those that are investing money.
Okay, as we wrap up the interview, I just want to ask you about how difficult is it for investing outside the United States? You were telling me before we started recording that you set up a product, a global IRA for people who want to start moving their assets offshore. Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, sure. Anybody who's interested in learning about it, it's globalira.com. I actually recorded a 7-part video series explaining all the details about it. If you're interested, you can go there and get that video series. But basically, excuse me, basically we talked about this before the show, that in the U.S., the two biggest pools of money or pools of assets that Americans have are their home and their retirement accounts. And I think you were the one that said that retirement accounts now are closing in on $20 trillion. So that's a pretty good chunk of money. As I see it, that big of a chunk of money also makes it a high risk chunk of money when you consider the U.S. is also, ironically, about almost $20 trillion in debt right now as well. And so there's going to be something that happens in the future for people, or where governments, or especially the U.S. government, is going to go after these pools of money in some way, shape, or form to kind of shore up some deficits. Who knows how it's going to happen? I mean, will it be a full nationalization of retirement plans like Argentina did? I mean, maybe not. I would view it really, it'll probably be more like Congress passes a law that says 10 or 20% of all your retirement accounts have to be held in treasury bonds. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, Fidelity goes in and liquidates 20% of your portfolio and buys a treasury bond without you knowing it.
For national security, of course, right? For
safety.
For safety and security purposes, to promote a better America or something, you have to do that. Or, it could be where, we're going to take 1% per year and then we're going to take another 1% because the people in power just prefer, passing these things in increments. That seems to be the historical, right, that they increment it up. So eventually, though, we could get to that 10% or 20% level. They just might do it, a 1% increase per year.
Well, if you think about it, 10%, if it got to 10%, that's $2 trillion. That's a pretty significant influx of cash to the Treasury Department. I mean, that shores up the deficit for 1 year anyway, and makes whoever's running the administration look like a hero. It also drives interest rates down because when you get that many buyers in the bond market, it'll drive bond prices down. It'll drive it'll drive bond prices down, right? So, I mean, the administration will look like a hero at that point. But anyway, so we have our global IRA product. It essentially helps people kind of take control of their IRAs, 401ks, their Roths, SEP IRAs, whatever. And they can invest in pretty much whatever asset they want. I mean, there are a couple of limitations, but if you want to buy foreign real estate, you want to invest in foreign stock markets, you want to you can invest domestically also if you want to buy real estate, rental houses, cattle farms, whatever. But it allows you to take control over that and get it out of the global financial market and invest it, kind of however you want to do. So I think it's a good product for people really hands-on about their finances and they want to take control over, their retirement account futures.
And also, you're saying for people worried about confiscation risk, you're saying once they're in the IRA and they start buying foreign assets, it makes it the U.S. government can't confiscate the assets then?
Well, if you think about it, let's say you got all your money in a global IRA, and I mean it's still a qualified retirement plan, so you still get to make your contributions if you want. It's still tax deferred. I'm talking obviously just about IRAs, not Roths or whatever, but you can. I mean, obviously you can roll over 401ks and that sort of thing. But if you think about it, if you take all that money, just hypothetically, you got $500,000 in there, and you go, let's say you buy a beach house, a rental beach house in Costa Rica, and you put some gold in a vault in Switzerland, and maybe you buy some land in Panama. And I don't know, you put your money in some peer-to-peer lending platforms in Europe. Just off the top of my head, a self-managed portfolio, something like that. Well, first of all, you're talking about land in Panama. You can't confiscate land in Panama. What are they going to do? Show up with a bulldozer and pick the dirt up? They can't confiscate a beach house in Costa Rica. They can't confiscate gold sitting in a private vault in Switzerland. They can't confiscate money in a European peer-to-peer lending platform because all of these things are outside of the reach of the U.S. court system. They can't just go and confiscate assets in other countries. I mean, it just doesn't work like that, right? And so worst case scenario, in my opinion, worst case scenario, if Congress passes a law that says, okay, 10% of your retirement accounts have to be held in U.S. Treasury bonds, and you don't want that, you don't agree to it. Worst case scenario is your retirement account becomes a non-qualified plan. Maybe you got to pay your penalties and your taxes due on it, but at least it's not confiscated. It's not taken it's not liquidated without your consent. It's not confiscated in any way, shape, or form. You may have a tax penalty, but it's still your asset. It's still, but at that point, basically, we would just make a change in the operating agreement of the LLC that owns the asset. So it's no longer your IRA that owns it. It's now you personally own it, or you personally own the LLC. So it's really not that hard to do this stuff. You asked how hard it is to invest overseas. I look at it like this. 20 years ago, if you lived in Virginia, how hard was it to open a bank account in California? Well, you had to fly to California, walk in the bank, show your ID, fill in the forms, and do it, right? Mm-hmm. But today, who walks into a bank anymore? Nobody walks into a bank anymore. Nobody.
Only in a movie, yeah. Only in a movie with a briefcase, right? So.
Right. Nobody walks in a bank anymore. If you're opening a brokerage account with Fidelity, do you actually go to the Fidelity office to open a brokerage account? No, of course not. You do it sitting at your desk or on your couch in your living room with your fingertips on a keyboard, right? And you take a picture of your passport and your driver's license to upload it as your identity documents, but nobody shows up. And it's kind of the same thing. Internationally, it's not really that difficult either. I mean, technology has given us tremendous advantages. We can open bank accounts, brokerage accounts, I mean, okay, maybe if you want to buy a beach house in Costa Rica, maybe you want to go see it, but that's an excuse to go to Costa Rica, I guess, if you think about it that way. But stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess in that sense, it's a little bit more difficult. But then again, if I'm buying a beach house in, I don't know, Massachusetts, for example, I still want to go see it, even if I don't live in Massachusetts, right? So I don't know, stuff like that. But gold you can buy sight unseen. I don't think you care, what shade of yellow your gold is. Like you don't need to see it. You can show up at the vault and put your hands on it and then put it back in the vault if you want, but it's not necessary.
It's very interesting. Yeah, a lot of people are scared to move their money out of the country, but people should be diversified because we don't know what the rules changes are going to be going forward. And these governments, a lot of them basically are broke. They're greedy, and they just see us as cows that they just can milk more and more and more each and every year, layering on more and more taxes, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, you speak about diversification. I mean, any of your portfolio managers is going to speak to you about diversification too. They're going to say, yeah, you need to diversify between stocks and bonds and, small caps and big caps and energy stocks and resource stocks and so on and so forth. I say take that a step further. You need to diversify geographically and you need to diversify asset classes. For example, you don't need just stocks in your portfolio. Maybe you need to have some real estate. Maybe you don't need to be invested solely based on the U.S. dollar. Maybe you need some currency diversification. Maybe you need to buy some real estate in Colombia and diversify in the Colombian peso. Take advantage of a lower currency valuation right now where you can see currency appreciation and cash flow on the real estate. Stuff like that. I mean, I'd say diversify geographically, diversify in asset classes between real estate, precious metals, cash, stocks, bonds, private business, stuff like that. I think you need to take that diversification a step beyond the traditional portfolio manager's view.
Yeah, I agree. But that's not what, the regular mainstream in the United States, Wall Street money manager or money manager you would have at some of these regular brokerages, because normally it's like just stocks, bonds, some money market funds, some cash. They tell you, not to, we can put you in a real estate investment trust instead of actually owning property or rental property or anything like that. But as we close out the interview, Bobby, you were telling me that you want to give our listeners a free report about going off the grid so they can go to your website with Wall Street for Main Street's promo code.
Yeah, exactly. So I wrote a report. It took me actually several years to come up with this information. It's not a slow process, but basically I wrote a report called the step-by-step guide to go off the grid without leaving your couch. So basically the idea behind it is we live in a world where our privacy is being attacked constantly. It's constantly, you have no privacy, right? I mean, in a simple Google search, Jason, I could probably find in about 20, 30 minutes, if I wanted to, I could probably find your social security number, your driver's license number, your home address, what bank you bank with, and, probably your last girlfriend's Facebook page, right? I mean, it's it's not that hard to find this stuff nowadays in this connected world. And really it comes down to the information you and I input into databases, because I can't go to Wells Fargo or Citi or whoever and open a bank account without telling them some personal information about me. They have their know your customer laws and so on and so forth, right? So I developed a strategy basically where you can provide the information you want to the databases, not the information necessarily that they need. I don't know how else to explain that, but basically you kind of create a veil of privacy around yourself and you provide the information to the databases to give them a picture of you, but not necessarily the true picture of you. And so it's kind of a way to go off the grid. And by go off the grid, I don't mean living in a cabin in Idaho with rainwater catch tanks and, solar panels, which is not necessarily a bad idea either. But I mean, literally without having to change anything in your current lifestyle, but you basically extract yourself out of public record, if that makes sense. And so it's kind of an interest. If anybody's interested in regaining a bit of your privacy and regaining some of that, some of that privacy that we've lost and some of that, anonymity we deserve, it's an interesting report. It's really a step-by-step action guide where you can actually do this, this, and this, and this. So anyway, the report, I've got it at globalwealthprotection.com/WS4MS. and that stands for Wall Street for Main Street. So that's globalwealthprotection.com/WS, the number 4 MS. So you can read the article there.
Awesome. And our listeners will definitely want to check that out. A lot of them are worried about, losing liberty and privacy and government intrusion. We do have a lot of libertarians who listen, although we have a lot of people who aren't libertarian but still like investing and listening to alternative opinions. But I want to thank you, and I'll also put the link to that in the information section of the interview. I want to thank you again for your time, Bobby. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have a lot more current events coming out similar to these, to like what India and Australia and German banks are announcing about, taxes on depositors' money. And then we just have these crazy academic economist papers about, these policies didn't work. We have to double down like a degenerate gambler and do even more of these things with negative interest rates and all this other garbage.
I do not doubt that at all. That's why right now, more than anything, is the time to take responsibility for your own actions and take the individualistic approach. Do what's best for you and your family, your kids, run your business, invest your money wisely, diversify. But it's really, in my opinion, a very individualistic approach right now, or it should be.